Yuki Tanaka was 24, an Omega, and a single mother with absolutely nothing left to lose. By 5:30 in the morning, the world had already collapsed around her for the third time that week. The elderly woman who'd been watching her 7-month-old daughter, Mika, for the past 4 months called in tears her arthritis had flared so badly overnight that she couldn't stand, couldn't hold the baby, couldn't even open the child-proof lock on the medication bottle she needed. "I'm so sorry, Yuki-chan," Mrs. Chin had sobbed through the phone, her voice cracking. "I can't. Not today. Not for a while. You need to find someone else." Yuki checked her bank account immediately after hanging up. The number stared back at her like a cruel joke. $237. Enough for maybe 4 days of formula. 3 of Mika had a growth spurt. Rent was due in 6 days. Her last paycheck had been cut short because she'd had to leave early twice. Once when Mika had a fever, once when Mrs. Chen's back gave out mid-shift. Calling in sick wasn't an option. 3 absences in 4 months, and Serena Walsh, the floor manager at Azure, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, had made it abundantly clear during Yuki's last performance review. 1 more absence, 1 more late arrival, 1 more anything. And she was gone. Losing this job meant losing the studio apartment she shared with Mika in a week. No savings. No family. Her parents had disowned her when she refused to name the alpha who'd knocked her up at a party, an alpha whose face she barely remembered, whose scent she'd tried to burn out of her memory. No other job offers, because who wanted to hire an unmated Omega with a baby? So when the December snow started sticking to the windows of her drafty apartment, Yuki did the only thing she could think of. She wrapped Mika in the thickest blanket she owned, a cream-colored knit thing her mother had given her before the disowning, before everything, pressed a long, trembling kiss to her daughter's soft black hair, and whispered, "Just one shift, little one. Just one. I promise. Mama will come back for you." Mika blinked up at her with those calm, ancient eyes that had always seemed too knowing for a 7-month-old, like she understood exactly how precarious their existence was. She didn't cry. She never cried, not really. Sometimes Yuki worried about that, worried that Mika had learned too early that crying didn't bring help, that silent endurance was the only way to survive. Yuki shoved the diaper bag over one shoulder, stuffed with 2 bottles, formula, 3 diapers, a pacifier, and a small plush rabbit that Mika refused to sleep without, and slipped out the door into the snow. Azure wasn't just a restaurant. It was the crown jewel of an empire built by Alara Vance, an alpha so powerful, so notoriously cold, that people in the city's underground network whispered her name like a prayer and a warning all at once. 32 years old, heir to a fortune that had been old when her great-grandmother was young, and the sole owner of a culinary empire that spanned 3 cities. She was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, sharp, untouchable, dangerous. Tall, broad-shouldered for an alpha woman, with pale blonde hair she kept pulled back in a severe knot, and eyes the color of frozen steel. She never smiled, at least, not where anyone could see. Staff who'd worked at Azure for years claimed they'd never heard her laugh, never seen her expression soften, never witnessed anything resembling warmth from the woman who signed their paychecks. Yuki had worked at Azure as a server for 9 months. 9 months of keeping her head down, her scent suppressed with industrial strength blockers that made her skin itch, her eyes averted whenever Alara Vance swept through the dining room in her black designer suits. She'd never spoken to the alpha directly, never made eye contact, never done anything that might draw attention to herself, because Omegas like her didn't survive by standing out. They survived by being invisible. The back door of Azure swung open at 6:15, and Yuki slipped inside like a ghost. The prep cooks were already at their stations, knives clacking against cutting boards, too focused on their work to notice the quiet Omega who always arrived 15 minutes early. The storage room near the service corridor was her only hope. Small, windowless, crammed with extra linens and boxes of wine, and rarely used before the dinner rush. Yuki had discovered it during her second week, had mapped out every closet and cupboard in the restaurant during slow shifts, always looking for a place to hide if everything fell apart. She just hadn't expected to use it for this. Yuki spread a clean tablecloth on the concrete floor, boring white linen, the kind that cost more than her weekly grocery budget, and laid down the padded inserts she'd pulled from Mika's diaper bag. She gently set her daughter on the makeshift bed, arranging the cream-colored blanket around her small body. Mika blinked up at her, one tiny fist reaching for Yuki's hair. "Be good, my love," Yuki murmured, brushing her thumb over Mika's soft cheek. "Be quiet. Mama will come back every hour. I promise." She left the plush rabbit within reach, made sure the bottle was accessible just in case, and pulled the storage room door shut until only a crack remained enough for air. Not enough, she thought, for anyone to notice. She didn't see the way that crack aligned perfectly with the dim staircase leading down to Alara Vance's private office, or the faint, cold thread of alpha pheromone that drifted upward, sharp as winter air, controlled as a blade, and so potent that even through Yuki's industrial-strength blockers, it made the back of her neck prickle. The shift hit like a freight train. Orders flooded in before 7, business executives closing deals over Azure's famous Eggs Benedict, wealthy retirees treating themselves to champagne brunches, couples celebrating anniversaries with courses that cost more than Yuki's rent. She moved on autopilot, pouring coffee, reciting specials, balancing trays with steady hands while her mind ricocheted back to the storage room every 30 seconds. At 8:15, she slipped away under the pretense of restocking napkins. 30 seconds. Mika was still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that made Yuki's heart clench. At 9:30, she claimed she needed to use the bathroom. Same thing, a faint stir, a soft sigh, then silence. By 10:45, the panic had settled into her chest like a block of ice. She'd been so careful. So goddamn careful. But what if someone needed the storage room? What if Serena decided to do an inventory check? What if? Tanaka. Yuki nearly dropped the water pitcher she was holding. Serena Walsh appeared at her elbow like a specter, her sharp blue eyes sweeping over Yuki's face with clinical precision. She was a beta, neither alpha nor omega, which somehow made her worse. She had no instinctive understanding of what Yuki was going through, no biological pull toward sympathy. Just cold, efficient management. Table 7 is complaining about the temperature of their coffee, Serena said, her voice low and clipped. Fix it. And Tanaka, she leaned closer, and Yuki caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral and expensive. You've been distracted all morning. If I find out you're hiding something, there will be consequences. Understood. Yuki nodded, her throat tight. Yes, ma'am. Understood. Consequences. That was Serena's favorite word. Consequences meant termination. Termination meant homelessness. Homelessness meant... She couldn't finish the thought. Couldn't let herself go there. At 11:30, Yuki couldn't take it anymore. She told the bartender she needed to use the restroom and sprinted down the service corridor, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. The storage room door was still ajar, exactly as she'd left it. But the tablecloth was empty. The cream-colored blanket lay crumpled in a heap. The plush rabbit sat abandoned against the wall, its glass eyes staring at nothing. Mika was gone. Yuki's blood turned to ice water. She searched every inch of the back area, behind the dishwashing station, inside the linen closet, even the loading dock where the morning deliveries came in. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the door frames. No sign of her daughter. No sound. Nothing but the distant clatter of the restaurant and the pounding of her own terrified heart. Then she saw it. The staircase door at the end of the corridor, the one marked "Private Staff are Prohibited," the one that led straight down to Alara Vance's office, was slightly open. Just a crack, just enough for a thin line of warm light to cut across the cold concrete floor. Yuki's hands trembled as she approached. Every story she'd ever heard about Alara Vance flashed through her mind in sickening succession. Ruthless. Unforgiving. The kind of alpha who eliminated problems instead of solving them. There was a rumor, probably not even a rumor, probably true, that a supplier had tried to cheat her out of $50,000 3 years ago, and he'd simply disappeared. Not dead, exactly, but not in the city anymore. Not anywhere anyone could find him. Yuki had never made eye contact with Alara Vance. Had only seen her from across the dining room, usually during the dinner rush when the alpha made her nightly rounds, tall, impossibly composed, dressed in black, her pale hair catching the light like spun silver. She exuded power, the kind that made omegas instinctively lower their eyes and betas step aside. Yuki had always made sure to be somewhere else when Alara walked through. But Mika was behind that door. Yuki pushed it open. The air changed the moment she stepped onto the staircase. Warmer. Heavier. Thick with alpha pheromone, not the aggressive, overwhelming kind she'd experienced from the alpha who'd gotten her pregnant, the kind that made her want to claw her own skin off. This was different. Controlled. Precise. It wrapped around her like cold silk, not comforting exactly, but grounding. Like standing in a snowstorm and realizing the cold could keep you awake, keep you alive. She descended slowly, each step creaking beneath her weight. The staircase was narrow, lit by soft sconces along the walls, and at the bottom she could see a heavy oak door, also slightly ajar. Warm golden light spilled through the gap, along with that steady, controlled alpha scent. Yuki hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. Her hand hovered over the door for a long moment, her heart racing so fast she felt lightheaded. She should knock. She should announce herself. She should do literally anything other than push open her boss's private office door without permission. But Mika was inside. She pushed. Alara Vance was sitting in a leather chair behind a massive mahogany desk, her eyes half closed, her head tilted back against the headrest. She looked like she'd been working through the night, her black blazer discarded over the back of a nearby couch, her white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle. Her pale blonde hair had escaped its usual severe knot, falling in soft strands around her sharp cheekbones. But Yuki didn't see any of that. Not really. All she saw was Mika. Her daughter was curled against Alara's chest, wrapped in the cream-colored blanket, one tiny fist fisted in the fabric of Alara's white shirt. Mika's eyes were closed, her breathing slow and deep, her small body completely relaxed in a way Yuki had rarely seen outside their own apartment. Alara's arm was wrapped around her, one large hand supporting Mika's back with a gentleness that seemed entirely at odds with everything Yuki had ever heard about the Ice Queen of Azure. It wasn't forced. Wasn't awkward. It was instinctive, like she'd held 100 babies before, like she knew exactly how to support a 7-month-old's head without thinking about it. Yuki froze in the doorway. She'd expected anger, disgust, a cold, cutting demand to get out before she called security. Instead, she was staring at the most feared alpha in the city, holding her daughter like she was something precious. Alara's eyes opened slowly. Not suddenly, like she'd been aware of Yuki's presence from the moment she'd stepped onto the stairs, maybe even from the moment Mika had crawled through that door. Her gaze locked onto Yuki instantly, sharp and assessing, the way it always was when she looked at Steph. But then something flickered across her face, something Yuki couldn't name, as she glanced down at the baby in her arms. She crawled, Alara said. Her voice was lower than Yuki had expected. Rich, with a faint rasp that sent an unexpected shiver down Yuki's spine. Not warm, exactly, but not cold either. Just present. I was going over the quarterly reports, Alara continued, her gaze still on Mika. Heard something at the door. Thought it was a mouse at first. But then I saw two tiny hands pushing it open and... She paused, and for just a moment, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She sat there on the bottom step and looked at me like she owned the place. Like she'd been looking for me specifically. Yuki tried to speak, but her throat was too tight. She swallowed hard, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Vance," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no choice. I couldn't find childcare, and if I didn't come in today," Serena said. "Stop." One word. Calm, absolute, brooking no argument. Yuki's mouth snapped shut. Alara looked at her for a long moment, her steel blue eyes sweeping over Yuki's disheveled appearance, the flyaway strands of black hair escaping her ponytail, the faint shadows under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. The way her hands were clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had gone white. Then Alara nodded toward a leather armchair in the corner of the office, one Yuki had never noticed before. "Sit," Alara said, "before you fall down." Yuki's legs gave out before she could decide whether to obey. She sank into the armchair, which was shockingly comfortable, soft leather that seemed to mold around her tired body. She kept her eyes on Mika, on the way Alara's thumb was brushing slow, unconscious circles over Mika's back through the blanket. "She's calm," Alara said, more to herself than to Yuki. Unusually calm for her age. Most babies that young would have been screaming by now. New environment. Unfamiliar alpha pheromones. She glanced up at Yuki, one pale eyebrow raised. "She's been like this since I found her. Not a single fuss." Yuki nodded, a faint note of pride slipping into her voice despite her fear. "She's always been like that. Even when she was a newborn. The nurses at the hospital said they'd never seen a baby so quiet." Alara's gaze dropped back to Mika. "What's her name?" "Mika." "Mika," Alara repeated, testing the name. It sounded different coming from her, softer, somehow, like the consonants were warmer in her mouth. "Is it short for something?" Yuki shook her head. "Just Mika. It means beautiful fragrance in Japanese. My grandmother's name was Mika. She passed away when I was 16. I wanted." She trailed off, her throat tightening. "I wanted her to have something to remember our family by, even if the rest of them don't want anything to do with us." Alara nodded slowly, like that made perfect sense. The office was quiet for a long moment, the only sounds Mika's soft breathing and the distant, muffled clatter of the restaurant above. Yuki could still smell Alara's pheromone, that cold, controlled alpha scent, wrapped around her like a second layer of skin. And for the first time since she'd started taking blockers at 16, she didn't feel the urge to reach for another dose. It didn't make her feel small or weak or hunted. It made her feel safe, which was absolutely ridiculous. Alara Vance was dangerous. She was an alpha. She was Yuki's boss. She was the kind of woman who ate lesser alphas for breakfast and didn't even bother to wipe her mouth. But Mika looked safe. More than safe, she looked content, curled against Alara's chest like she'd finally found something she'd been searching for. "She's an Omega," Alara said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Yuki tensed. "Yes. The doctor confirmed it when she was born. Her scent is still developing, but..." "Unstable," Alara interrupted. Her jaw tightened slightly. "It's flickering. I noticed it when she crawled in. One moment it's warm, the next it's anxious. She's not grounded." Yuki's chest ached. "I know. The doctor said it's because she doesn't have a stable alpha presence. Her father..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the words out loud. Her father was a stranger. Her father was a mistake. Her father left before I even knew I was pregnant. The father isn't in the picture, Alara finished for her, her voice flat. I gathered that much. No, Yuki whispered. He's not. Alara was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on Mika's sleeping face. For Omegas this young, she said finally, an alpha presence isn't just about comfort. It's about health, neurological development, emotional regulation. Without a stable alpha to ground her, her scent will continue to destabilize. She'll develop anxiety disorders, sleep disturbances, physical pain, eventually. I've seen it happen. Yuki's tears finally spilled over. She'd noticed Mika's restlessness, the way she sometimes woke up screaming for no apparent reason, the way her scent could shift from sweet to sharp in the space of a single breath. But she thought it was just colic, or teething, or the normal difficulty of being a baby in a world that wasn't designed for her. She'd had no idea it was because of something Yuki couldn't provide. I can't, Yuki said, her voice breaking. I can't afford. I don't have anyone. I've tried to find an alpha who would help, just for the pheromone exposure, but she laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Who wants to bond with an Omega who already has a baby? Who wants to tie themselves to someone else's mistake? Alara didn't answer immediately. She just looked at Mika, her hand still moving in that slow, unconscious rhythm across the baby's back. The moment stretched on, thick with unspoken words, and Yuki felt like she was being dissected, like Alara could see every secret she'd ever tried to hide, every desperate choice she'd ever made, every sleepless night she'd spent wondering if she was destroying her daughter just by existing. She wanted to run. Wanted to grab Mika and flee, to disappear into the snow and never come back. But she couldn't move. Not when Mika was so calm. Not when Alara's pheromone was wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and steady and safe. The door to the staircase creaked. Yuki jumped, her head snapping up. Serena Walsh stood in the doorway, her sharp blue eyes widening as she took in the scene. Yuki curled in the armchair, tears on her cheeks, and Alara Vance, the Alara Vance, holding a baby like she'd been doing it her whole life. For a split second, something dark flashed across Serena's face. Jealousy? Rage? Something ugly and hungry that made Yuki's skin crawl. Then it smoothed into a neutral, professional mask. MS. Vance, I apologize for the interruption, Serena said, her voice too polite, too controlled. But the lunch rush is starting, and we're short-staffed. I was looking for Tanaka. Alara didn't even glance at her. She's here. Serena's smile tightened at the corners. I see that. But Ms. Vance, unauthorized children in the building are against company policy. Especially in your private office. If this got out. Company policy, Alara interrupted, is whatever I say it is. I own the company, Serena. Or have you forgotten? Serena's jaw clenched so hard Yuki could see the muscles jumping beneath her skin. Of course not, Ms. Vance. I would never. Good. Alara's gaze finally shifted to Serena, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Her eyes were cold, colder than Yuki had ever seen them, cold enough to freeze blood. Then you'll have no trouble returning to the dining room and handling the lunch rush yourself. Tanaka is otherwise occupied. But, Serena. That was all. Just her name, spoken in that flat, absolute tone. But Serena recoiled like she'd been slapped. Her face went pale, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped back toward the staircase. Yes, Ms. Vance. Of course. She glanced at Yuki, a quick, venomous look that promised future retribution, and then she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her. Yuki let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thank you, she whispered. Alara looked back at her. She's been trying to get you fired for months. It wasn't a question. I've seen the reports. The write-ups for lateness when you were clocked in on time. The customer complaints that magically appeared on days when she was in a bad mood. She doesn't like Omegas. Yuki nodded slowly. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that Alara Vance had noticed, made something shift in her chest. Why are you helping me? The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw and desperate. You don't even know me. Alara's gaze softened, just slightly, as she looked down at Mika. Because someone should have, she said quietly. The words hit Yuki like a physical blow. Because no one had helped her. Not her parents, who'd thrown her out when she was 3 months pregnant. Not Mika's father, whoever he was, wherever he'd gone. Not the social workers who'd shrugged and told her she was on her own when she'd begged for housing assistance. Not the other Omegas at her support group, who'd looked at her with pity and whispered about how they'd never be so stupid as to get knocked up by a stranger. No one had helped. But Alara Vance, the Ice Queen, the ruthless alpha boss, the woman everyone in the city was afraid of, was sitting here holding her baby like she mattered. The intercom on Alara's desk buzzed, shattering the moment. Alara pressed a button with her free hand. What? Ms. Vance, Table 12 is requesting your presence. They say it's urgent. The voice belonged to Marcus, the head chef. Yuki recognized his gruff tone. Something about the wine list. Alara sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible exhale. She carefully shifted Mika in her arms, supporting the baby's head with practiced ease. You need to go back to work, she said to Yuki. I'll keep her here. This office is more secure than anywhere else in the building. No one gets in without my permission. Yuki stood up, her heart racing. I can't just leave her. What if She'll be fine, Alara said, her voice firm but not unkind. There's a camera in the corner. You can watch her on your phone if you want. I'll send you the access code. She paused, then added, and I'll have Marcus cover your section for 10 minutes every hour. You can come check on her then. Yuki hesitated. Leaving Mika with a stranger, with Alara Vance, should have terrified her. But Mika was still sleeping, still calm, still wrapped in that cream-colored blanket like nothing in the world could touch her. And something in Alara's eyes, something soft and almost vulnerable, made Yuki trust her. Okay, Yuki whispered. Alara held Mika out to her. Yuki took her daughter, pressing Mika close to her chest, breathing in her warm, sweet scent. Mika stirred, nuzzling into Yuki's neck, one tiny hand fisting in Yuki's hair. Yuki's heart ached with a love so fierce it almost hurt. I'll be back soon, she murmured against Mika's soft hair. I promise. Mama always comes back. She handed Mika back to Alara, and their fingers brushed for just a split second. The contact sent a jolt through Yuki, warm, electric, nothing like the cold, clinical touches she'd trained herself to expect from alphas. Alara's gaze flicked to their hands, then back to Yuki's face. Her eyes darkened slightly, the steel blue deepening to something closer to storm clouds. Go, Alara said, her voice a little rougher than before. Before I change my mind. Yuki nodded and turned, hurrying up the stairs before she could think too hard about what that meant. When she stepped back into the dining room, the noise hit her like a wave, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the sizzle of food from the open kitchen. But she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt focused, centered. For the first time in months, she wasn't just surviving. She had something to fight for, something that felt like hope. The next few hours passed in a blur. Yuki worked faster than she had in months, her movements sharp and efficient, her customer service smile brighter than it had any right to be. Every hour on the dot, she slipped away to the staircase, down to Alara's office. And every time, Mika was still calm, sometimes sleeping, sometimes awake, and staring up at Alara with those ancient, knowing eyes, sometimes reaching for Alara's face like she was trying to memorize its contours. Alara never seemed annoyed. Never checked her watch or sighed or glanced at the door like she was waiting for Yuki to leave. She'd just sit there, working on her laptop or taking calls in that low, measured voice, one hand always resting on Mika's back. Once, Yuki walked in to find Alara feeding Mika a bottle, where she'd gotten the formula. Yuki had no idea, and Mika was drinking it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her dark eyes locked on Alara's face. At 2 o'clock, Yuki slipped in for her usual check. Mika was asleep, curled up on Alara's lap, her head resting against Alara's stomach. Alara was running her fingers through Mika's soft black hair, her gaze fixed on the baby with an expression Yuki had never seen on her before. Something soft. Something almost wondering. Like she couldn't quite believe this was real. She didn't notice Yuki at first. Yuki hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to break the moment. There was something so intimate about it, so vulnerable, that she felt like she was intruding on something private. Something sacred. Alara looked up suddenly, her eyes meeting Yuki's. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Alara's gaze was intense, sharper than Yuki had ever seen it, like she was seeing Yuki for the first time. Not just a quiet Omega server who kept her head down and did her job, but a person. A mother. Someone worth noticing. Yuki's heart raced, and she felt her cheeks flush. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. There was something in Alara's eyes, something warm, something hungry, something that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. "She's been asking for you," Alara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost intimate. Yuki stepped closer. "Really?" Alara nodded. "Fussed a little about 20 minutes ago. Wouldn't calm down until I told her you'd be back soon." She hesitated, then added, "She's very attached to you. I can smell it, the bond between you. It's strong." Yuki smiled, a small, shaky thing. "She's all I have. All I've had for a long time." Alara's gaze softened. "You're a good mother, Yuki." The use of her first name sent a shiver down Yuki's spine. No one at work called her Yuki. They called her Tanaka, or the Omega server, or sometimes, when Serena was in a particularly bad mood, that girl with the attitude problem. Hearing Alara say it, warm and low and deliberate, felt like a gift. "Thank you," Yuki whispered. Alara stood up carefully, cradling Mika in her arms. "You should take a proper break. Eat something. Drink some water. I'll watch her." Yuki shook her head. "I'm fine. I can keep working." "Yuki." Alara's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You haven't eaten since before your shift started. I can smell it on you, the hunger. The exhaustion. You're running on fumes." She stepped closer, close enough that Yuki could feel the warmth radiating off her skin. "Go. Eat. I'll keep her safe. I promise." Yuki hesitated, then nodded. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to break this strange, fragile connection that had formed between them. But her stomach was growling, and her head was starting to ache from dehydration, and she knew Alara was right. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." She turned to leave, but Alara called her name. "Yuki." She looked back. "If you need anything at all, you come to me. Not Serena. Not Marcus. Not anyone else. Me." Alara's eyes were intense, almost fierce. "I don't want you handling this alone anymore." Yuki's throat tightened. "I will," she said. "Thank you, Ms. Vance." Alara. The word hung in the air between them, an offering. A door cracked open just enough to let in light. "Alara," Yuki repeated. The name felt like a secret. Something to cherish. She left the office, her heart racing, and went to the staff break room. She grabbed a protein bar from the vending machine and sat down at the plastic table, but she couldn't eat. All she could think about was Alara, her hands, her voice, the way she'd looked at Mika, the way she'd looked at Yuki. She'd never felt this way about anyone. Never felt this pull, this connection, this desperate need to be seen. It was dangerous. Alara was her boss. She was an alpha. She was wealthy and powerful and so far out of Yuki's league that they might as well have been living on different planets. But Yuki couldn't help it. She was falling for her. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Yuki checked on Mika every hour, and each time she found her daughter calmer, happier, more settled than she'd been in weeks. Alara had somehow acquired a portable crib, a sleek, expensive thing that looked like it belonged in a boutique baby store, and Mika was sleeping in it when Yuki came down at 4 o'clock, her small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "Where did you get that?" Yuki asked, gesturing to the crib. Alara glanced up from her laptop. "I had Marcus pick it up from my apartment. It was my niece's. She's 3 now, doesn't need it anymore." Yuki's eyes widened. You sent someone to your apartment to get a crib for my baby?" "Your baby needed somewhere safe to sleep," Alara said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The storage room floor wasn't acceptable. Yuki's throat tightened. "I can't. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't." Alara's voice was soft. "Just, don't thank me. It's not a favor. It's just what should have been done." At 6 o'clock, the dinner rush started and Yuki was pulled back into the chaos. She worked until 9, running trays, pouring wine, smiling at customers until her cheeks ached. Every time she passed Serena, she felt the beta's cold gaze on her back, felt the weight of her resentment pressing down like a physical force. But she didn't care. Because at 9:15, Serena approached her with a tight, controlled expression. "Tanaka, Ms. Vance wants to see you in her office." "Now." Yuki's heart skipped. "Is everything okay? Is Mika?" "The baby is fine," Serena snapped, her eyes flashing. "Just go." Yuki didn't wait to be told twice. She hurried down the service corridor, down the narrow staircase, and pushed open the door to Alara's office. Mika was asleep in the portable crib, her small body curled around the plush rabbit. And Alara was sitting at her desk, watching Yuki with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Close the door," Alara said. Yuki obeyed, her heart pounding. "Is something wrong?" "Did Mika?" "Mika is perfect," Alara interrupted. "She's been asleep for 2 hours. Hasn't made a sound." She paused, and something shifted in her eyes, something Yuki couldn't name. "I wanted to talk to you. About what happens now." Yuki's stomach clenched. "Am I fired?" "What?" "No." Alara stood up, walking around her desk. She was tall, taller than Yuki had realized up close, and Yuki had to tilt her head back to meet her eyes. "God, no. I'm not firing you. I'm offering you something." "What?" Alara was quiet for a moment, her gaze searching Yuki's face. "I want you to bring her here. Every day. Not to the storage room, to my office. I have a spare key. You can come and go as you need to. I'll make sure Serena doesn't bother you." Yuki's breath caught. "I can't ask you to do that. It's too much. You don't even know me." "I'm not asking. I'm offering." Alara stepped closer, close enough that Yuki could smell her pheromones, cold and controlled, but underneath, something warmer. Something almost hesitant. "I like having her here. She's calming. And I haven't felt calm in a long time." Yuki's eyes burned with tears. "Why are you being so kind to us? We're nobody. I'm nobody. I'm just an omega who made a mistake and—" "Stop." Alara's hand came up, cupping Yuki's cheek. Her palm was warm, calloused in a way that suggested she worked with her hands more than most people assumed. Her thumb brushed over Yuki's cheekbone, wiping away a tear Yuki hadn't even realized had fallen. "You're not nobody," Alara said, her voice low and fierce. "You're a mother who's been fighting alone for months. You're an omega who's been failed by everyone who should have protected her. You're strong and brave and so beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes." She paused, her jaw tightening. "I've been watching you for months, Yuki. Not in a creepy way, I noticed you. The way you work. The way you treat the other staff. The way you never complain, even when you're exhausted. I noticed." Yuki's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "You noticed me?" "I noticed you," Alara repeated. And I told myself not to do anything about it. You're my employee. I'm your boss. It would be inappropriate. Unprofessional. Every rational part of my brain told me to keep my distance. But Ilara's thumb traced Yuki's lower lip, featherlight. But then your daughter crawled into my office, and she looked at me like she already knew me, and she fell asleep in my arms like I was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her voice cracked, just slightly. And I realized I didn't want to keep my distance anymore. I don't want to be professional. I want to know you. I want to know her. I want. She stopped, her eyes searching Yuki's face. Tell me to stop, Ilara whispered. Tell me this is too much, too fast, too inappropriate. Tell me to back off, and I will. I'll never mention it again. I'll go back to being your boss, and we'll pretend this never happened. Yuki should have told her to stop. She should have said no, should have kept her distance, should have protected herself and her daughter from the inevitable heartbreak of getting involved with someone like Ilara Vance. But Yuki was so tired of being alone. So tired of fighting. So tired of pretending she didn't want someone to hold her, someone to protect her, someone to love her and Mika like they mattered. I don't want you to stop, Yuki whispered. Ilara's eyes flared, something dark and hungry and desperate flashing through the steel blue. Yuki. Kiss me, Yuki said. Please. I've been alone for so long, and I don't want to be alone anymore. Kiss me. Ilara didn't need to be told twice. She leaned down, her hand sliding from Yuki's cheek to the back of her neck, and pressed her lips to Yuki's. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, questioning, like Ilara was afraid Yuki might change her mind. But when Yuki melted into her, when Yuki's hands came up to grip the front of Ilara's shirt and pull her closer, the kiss deepened. Ilara's tongue swept across Yuki's lower lip, and Yuki opened for her without thinking, letting Ilara's warmth flood her senses. Ilara tasted like coffee and something darker, something richer, like winter nights and warm fireplaces and safety. Her pheromones surged, wrapping around Yuki like a blanket, and Yuki felt her knees go weak. Ilara caught her, one arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against her body. They kissed for what felt like hours, or maybe only seconds, time losing all meaning in the warmth of Ilara's arms. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Ilara pressed her forehead against Yuki's. I've wanted to do that for months, Ilara admitted, her voice rough. Every time I saw you in the dining room, every time you smiled at a customer, every time you laughed at something Marcus said, I wanted to. I know, Yuki whispered. Me too. I didn't let myself think about it, but I know. Ilara pulled back just enough to look at her. Her eyes were soft, vulnerable in a way Yuki had never seen before. What does this mean? For us? For Mika? Yuki glanced at the portable crib, at her daughter sleeping peacefully, and felt something settle in her chest. I don't know, she admitted. But I want to find out. I want to try. Slowly, Ilara said. I don't want to rush this. I don't want to scare you off. You and Mika, you're too important to me already. Yuki nodded. Slowly, she agreed. But not too slowly. I've wasted enough time being scared. Ilara smiled, a real smile, small and hesitant, and so beautiful it made Yuki's heart ache. Okay, she said. Okay. She kissed Yuki again, softer this time, and Yuki felt something she'd thought was dead inside her start to bloom. Hope. The next few weeks were complicated. Yuki brought Mika to work every day, leaving her in Ilara's office instead of the storage room. Ilara had a key made for her, programmed to work only during her shifts, and she'd installed a baby monitor that connected to Yuki's phone. Every hour, Yuki slipped downstairs to check on them, and every hour, she found Ilara holding Mika, or feeding her, or reading to her from a book she'd bought specifically for that purpose. They didn't tell anyone. Officially, Mika was being cared for by a nanny in the building. Unofficially, Everyone knew something was going on. The way Alara looked at Yuki when she thought no one was watching, the way Yuki's cheeks flushed whenever Alara walked through the dining room, the way Serena's glare seemed to get sharper every day. But no one said anything, because no one crossed Alara Vance. At night, after Yuki's shift ended, Alara would walk her and Mika to her car, a sleek black SUV that Alara had insisted Yuki start using instead of the bus. It's safer, Alara had said, and Yuki hadn't argued. Sometimes, if Mika was already asleep, Alara would drive them home herself, and they'd sit in the parking lot of Yuki's rundown apartment building, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Alara told her about her family, about her younger sister, who died in a car accident 6 years ago, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter. About how she'd raised that niece, Lena, on her own, how Lena was 11 now and living with Alara's parents because Alara didn't think she could give her the attention she deserved. About how guilty she felt every single day for not being there. "I understand," Yuki had said, and she meant it. Because she knew what it was like to feel like you were failing the people you loved most. In turn, Yuki told Alara about Mika's father, about the party, the drinks she shouldn't have had, the alpha whose face she couldn't remember. About her parents' reaction, the way they'd thrown her out with nothing but a suitcase and a month's worth of rent money. About the loneliness of pregnancy, the terror of giving birth alone, the sleepless nights, and the desperate clawing for survival. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," Alara had said, and Yuki had cried. 3 weeks after that first kiss, Yuki's heat hit. She'd known it was coming, had felt the signs building for days, the warmth pooling in her belly, the way her skin seemed more sensitive, the way Alara's scent made her dizzy in a way it hadn't before. She'd taken her suppressants religiously, had doubled her dose when she felt the first twinges, but nothing worked. Maybe because her body recognized something her mind hadn't fully accepted yet. Maybe because she was falling in love with an alpha who actually wanted her. She was at work when the first real wave hit. She'd been carrying a tray of champagne flutes to table 4 when her knees buckled, when a rush of heat flooded through her so intense that she nearly dropped the entire tray. She set it down on a nearby service station, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Tanaka? What's wrong?" Marcus appeared at her elbow, his gruff face creased with concern. I can't," Yuki's vision blurred. She could smell herself now, her omega scent spiking sharp and sweet, and she knew everyone else could too. She saw heads turning, saw customers wrinkling their noses, saw the mortified expressions of the other servers. "Heat," someone whispered. "She's going into heat. Get her out of here before she—" "My office." Alara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She was standing at the entrance to the service corridor, her face pale, her eyes blazing with something Yuki had never seen before. Protective. Possessive. Desperate. "Everyone back to work," Alara commanded, her alpha voice ringing through the dining room. "Now. This doesn't concern any of you." The staff scattered. Customers turned back to their meals. And Alara crossed the room in 3 long strides, wrapping an arm around Yuki's waist and half carrying her toward the staircase. "I've got you," Alara murmured against her ear. "I've got you. You're okay." "Mika," Yuki gasped. "I need to. She's in your office, and I can't." "She's fine. She's in the crib. She's sleeping." Alara guided her down the stairs, one hand steady on her back. "We're going to my office. We're going to close the door. And then we're going to figure this out together." The office felt like a furnace when they stepped inside, or maybe that was just Yuki's body, burning up from the inside. She could smell her own heat pheromones thick in the air, sweet and desperate, and she could smell Alara's response, a sharp, urgent spike of alpha, a need that made her knees buckle all over again. Alara lowered her onto the leather couch in the corner of the office, the same couch Yuki had sat on weeks ago when this whole impossible thing had started. Her hands were shaking as she pulled away, and her eyes, her beautiful steel blue eyes, were dark with barely contained want. "Yuki," Alara said, her voice rough. "I need you to tell me what you want. Because right now, every instinct I have is screaming at me to," she stopped, her jaw clenching. "To take care of you. To touch you. To. I want you," Yuki whispered. The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest and desperate. "I've wanted you since the first day Mika crawled into your office. Since you held her like she mattered. Since you looked at me like I mattered." "You matter," Alara said fiercely. "God, Yuki, you matter so much. You and Mika, you're everything. You're—" "Then stop talking," Yuki said, reaching for her. "And kiss me." Alara kissed her. And this time, there was nothing tentative about it. What happened next was a blur of heat and pheromones and desperate hands. Alara was careful, so careful, always checking in, always making sure Yuki was okay, but she was also passionate in a way that made Yuki's head spin. She touched Yuki like she was something precious, something worth worshipping. She whispered Yuki's name like a prayer. And when Yuki finally came apart in her arms, crying out with a pleasure she'd never known was possible, Alara held her through it, her pheromones wrapping around Yuki like a shield. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the couch, Yuki's head pillowed on Alara's chest, Alara's fingers tracing lazy patterns on Yuki's back. Mika was still asleep in the crib, oblivious to the fact that her mother's entire world had just shifted on its axis. "I'm sorry," Alara said quietly. I didn't plan for." "Don't," Yuki interrupted. "Don't apologize. That was the best thing that's ever happened to me." Alara's arms tightened around her. "I've never done that before. With an omega. During heat. I've always been so careful to keep my distance, because I didn't want to take advantage?" Yuki finished. "You didn't. I wanted this. I want you." Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What does this mean? For us?" Yuki thought about it. About the way Alara had held Mika, the way she'd protected them both from Serena, the way she looked at Yuki like she was something worth fighting for. About the heat still humming beneath her skin, the bond that was already starting to form between them, tenuous and fragile, but growing stronger every second. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I don't want to go back to being just your employee. I want more." Alara tilted Yuki's chin up, forcing her to meet her eyes. "Then we'll have more," she said. "Whatever that looks like. Whatever it takes. I'm not letting you go, Yuki. Not now. Not ever." Yuki smiled, a real smile, bright and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The bond didn't happen right away. Alara insisted on taking things slowly, on letting Yuki's heat pass completely, on making sure she was thinking clearly before they made any permanent decisions. They talked about it for weeks, late at night after Mika had fallen asleep, curled up on the couch in Alara's penthouse apartment. Yuki had finally agreed to move in after the heat incident. Because staying in her rundown studio with a baby and a newly bonded alpha was just impractical. "What does it mean to you?" Yuki asked one night, her head resting on Alara's shoulder. "Bonding?" Alara was quiet for a moment, her hand stroking through Yuki's hair. "It means forever," she said finally. "It means no takebacks. It means our scents will merge and everyone will know we belong to each other. It means if something happens to you, I'll feel it. And if something happens to me, you'll feel it too." "That sounds terrifying," Yuki admitted. "It is," Alara agreed. "But it's also beautiful. It's the closest two people can ever be. It's knowing, without a doubt, that you're not alone anymore." Yuki thought about it. About the loneliness she'd carried for so long, the weight of raising Mika by herself, the fear of being abandoned again, the desperate hope that someday someone would love her enough to stay. "I want that," she said quietly. I want to not be alone anymore. Alara turned to face her, cupping her cheeks in both hands. Are you sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. I need you to be sure. Yuki looked at her, at the woman who'd held her daughter, who'd protected them both, who'd looked at her like she mattered. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was right. I'm sure, she said. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Alara kissed her soft and sweet and full of promise, and then she leaned down, pressing her lips to Yuki's neck, right over her mating gland, where the bond mark would sit. Yuki felt Alara's fangs lengthen, felt the sharp, brief pain as they pierced her skin, and then warmth. A flood of warmth that spread through her veins like honey, like fire, like coming home. Alara's pheromones surged, thick and sweet, weaving with Yuki's own scent, binding them together on a molecular level. Yuki gasped, her hands clinging to Alara's shoulders, as the world narrowed down to the feel of Alara's lips on her neck, the sound of her heartbeat, the scent of their combined pheromones. Safe. Warm. Home. When Alara pulled away, she pressed a soft kiss to the fresh mark, her eyes dark with emotion. Mine, she whispered. Yours, Yuki replied, leaning up to kiss her. This kiss was different, deeper, more intense, the bond thrumming between them like a silent song of belonging. Yuki had never felt so loved, so cherished, so seen. Alara worshipped her with her hands, her lips, her words, telling her how beautiful she was, how much she meant, how she'd never let anyone hurt her again. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together in Alara's massive bed, Mika sleeping peacefully in the nursery down the hall, Yuki knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for her whole life. A home. A month after the bonding, Serena Walsh made her move. Yuki had known it was coming, had seen the resentment building in Serena's eyes every time she looked at her, had heard the whispered comments about inappropriate workplace relationships and alphas who couldn't keep their hands off the help. But she'd hoped, naively, that Serena would keep her mouth shut. That she'd accept that Yuki was with Alara now and move on. She was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday, during the lunch rush. Yuki was pouring wine for a table of regulars when the front door of Azure burst open and 3 women in suits walked in, Serena at the front, flanked by 2 lawyers Yuki recognized from the corporate office. Tanaka Yuki, Serena announced, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. You're under investigation for inappropriate conduct with a superior. Your employment is hereby suspended pending review. The dining room went silent. Yuki felt every eye in the room turn to her, the customers, the servers, the kitchen staff peeking through the pass. Her face burned with humiliation, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the wine bottle. Serena, she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. This isn't, you can't just. I can, Serena interrupted, her smile sharp and cruel. I'm the floor manager. I have the authority to initiate investigations into workplace misconduct. And fraternizing with the owner, especially when you're an Omega in heat, is absolutely misconduct. Fraternizing? Alara's voice cut through the room like a whip. She was standing at the entrance to the service corridor, her pale hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes blazing with cold fury. She walked toward Serena with the slow, predatory grace of a wolf approaching wounded prey. Ms. Vance. Serena's smile faltered, but she held her ground. I'm simply doing my job. An Omega employee going into heat in the middle of the dining room, and then spending the rest of her shift in your private office with the door closed, it looks bad. For both of you. Looks bad, Alara repeated, her voice flat. You're concerned about appearances. I'm concerned about the reputation of this establishment, Serena said. And about the message it sends to other employees, that sleeping with the boss is a path to advancement. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Yuki felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from rage. She'd worked so hard. She'd never asked for special treatment. She'd never. Yuki and I are bonded, Alara said. The room went even quieter, if that was possible. Bonded, Serena repeated, her face going pale. You can't be. She's an Omega. You're an Alpha. The paperwork alone is already filed, Alara interrupted. With the Omega registry. With the city. With the corporate office. She stepped closer to Serena, close enough that Serena had to tilt her head back to meet her eyes. Yuki is my mate. My bonded Omega. Which means she's not just an employee, she's family. And in this company, family comes first. Serena's mouth opened and closed, fish-like. But the investigation is over before it started, Alara said. You're fired, Serena. For overstepping your authority. For creating a hostile work environment. For attempting to damage the reputation of a bonded Omega under my protection. She paused, her eyes narrowing. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be mailed. But now, 2 security guards appeared from the service corridor. Alara must have called them, and Serena's face crumpled. She looked at Yuki, her eyes bright with hatred, and for a moment, Yuki saw something truly ugly in her expression. This isn't over, Serena hissed. You think bonding with her protects you? You think. Take her out, Alara said, and the guards did. After Serena was gone, the dining room slowly returned to normal. Customers went back to their meals, servers went back to their tables, and Yuki stood frozen in the middle of the floor, her whole body trembling. Alara crossed to her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Come with me, she murmured. You need a minute. Yuki let Alara guide her down the service corridor, down the stairs, into the office that had become a second home. Mika was in the portable crib, awake now, her dark eyes tracking Alara's movements with that calm, knowing gaze. Sit down, Alara said, guiding Yuki to the couch. I'll get you some water. Alara. Yuki grabbed her hand, stopping her. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to announce our bonding to everyone. Alara sat down beside her, pulling Yuki into her arms. Yes, I did. Serena wasn't going to stop. She would have made your life hell, made Mika's life hell, if I hadn't put a stop to it. She pressed a kiss to Yuki's hair. You're mine. Both of you. And I protect what's mine. Yuki closed her eyes, leaning into Alara's warmth. I'm not used to someone protecting me, she admitted. I've been on my own for so long. You're not on your own anymore, Alara said. You're never going to be on your own again. In the weeks that followed, things slowly fell into place. Yuki's hours at Azure were adjusted. She now worked from 10 to 4, so she could spend more time with Mika in the mornings and evenings. Alara bought a house, a real house, with a backyard and a nursery and a kitchen big enough for both of them to cook in, and Yuki moved in permanently. Mika thrived in her new environment. Her sense stabilized, no longer sharp or anxious, but warm and sweet, a perfect blend of Yuki's Omega pheromones and Alara's alpha protection. She slept through the night, laughed more, and grew more curious about the world around her. She loved Alara, would crawl to her the moment she walked through the door, would cry if Alara left the room, would reach for her with chubby, insistent hands. And Alara loved her back. She read to Mika every night before bed, her low, steady voice filling the nursery with stories about dragons and princesses and brave little rabbits. She took Mika to the park on her days off, pushing her on the swings and catching her at the bottom of the slide. She fed her bottles and changed her diapers and rocked her to sleep when she had nightmares. You're good at this, Yuki said one night, watching Alara settle Mika into her crib. Alara looked up, her eyes soft. I've had practice. Lena was the same age as Mika when my sister died. I took care of her for 3 years before my parents stepped in. She brushed her fingers over Mika's hair. I miss her. Lena, I miss having a child in the house. Yuki crossed the room, wrapping her arms around Alara from behind. "You have Mika now," she said. And maybe someday, if you want, we could have another." Alara turned in her arms, her eyes wide. "You want more children?" "With me." Yuki smiled, leaning up to kiss her. "I want everything with you. A family. A future. Forever." Alara kissed her back, deep and passionate, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. "I love you," Alara whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Yuki replied. A year later, on a snowy December morning, exactly 1 year after Yuki had first brought Mika to Azure, they held a small ceremony in the backyard of their house. It wasn't a wedding exactly. Neither of them was religious, and the bond mark on Yuki's neck was more permanent than any piece of paper. But it was a celebration, a promise to each other, to Mika, to the small group of friends and family who'd gathered to witness it. Alara's parents were there, holding hands and crying openly. Her niece Lena, now 12, stood as the flower girl, scattering rose petals across the snow-dusted grass. Marcus from Azure catered the reception, and even the kitchen staff came, bearing gifts and congratulations. And Mika, 16 months old now, walking and talking and full of mischief, served as the ring bearer, waddling down the aisle with a small velvet pillow clutched to her chest. "Thank you," Yuki whispered to Alara as they stood at the altar, their hands clasped together. "For everything. For saving us." Alara shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to land." "A safe place," Yuki said. "That's all I ever wanted." Alara leaned down, kissing her softly. "You have it," she said. "You always will." That night, after the guests had gone home and Mika was asleep in her nursery, Yuki and Alara sat on the back porch, watching the snow fall. The world was quiet, muffled by the blanket of white, and Yuki felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. "Peace. What are you thinking about?" Alara asked, her arm around Yuki's shoulders. Yuki smiled, leaning into her warmth. "I'm thinking about the day I brought Mika to Azure. About hiding her in the storage room. About how terrified I was that I was going to lose everything. And instead, I found you." Yuki looked up at Alara, her eyes shining. "I brought my baby to work expecting to be fired. And instead, I found my home." Alara kissed her forehead, her lips lingering. "Best mistake you ever made." Yuki laughed, a real laugh, bright and free. "The best," she agreed. They sat there for a long time, watching the snow fall, holding each other, listening to the soft sound of Mika's breathing through the baby monitor. And Yuki thought about all the things she'd been afraid of, the poverty, the loneliness, the desperate struggle to survive. None of it mattered anymore, because she wasn't alone. She had Alara. She had Mika. She had a family. And as the snow continued to fall, covering the world in soft, silent white, Yuki closed her eyes and smiled. She was home. The end.